The Velshera had been cataloging species for 11,000 years. 11,000, which they had a word for the particular boredom of it. Velmorith, which translated, loosely, into something like the exhaustion of having already seen the shape of every possible surprise. They weren't arrogant about this. Arrogance requires insecurity at its core, and the Velshera had run out of insecurity somewhere around the 4th millennium. They were simply done. Done being surprised. Done recalibrating expectations. Done with the galaxy's endless parade of species who thought they were special. Senior cataloger HFY had personally logged 412 sapient civilizations. TBH 412. He added humanity at 413 and didn't adjust his posture. The report he filed on March 14, 2031, cross-referenced to Velshera's standard cycle 88,441.7, was 9 lines long. This was, for HFY, generous. Some species got 4, which designation? Homo sapiens. Origin world, Sol, 3. Classification, carbon-based, bilaterally symmetric, sexually reproductive, eusocial pack hunters. Technological tier, pre-interstellar, early fusion. Plus, lifespan, approximately 80 standard cycles. Notable physiological traits, negligible. He paused at notable physiological traits. Then, he added, unusually high pain tolerance. Ambulate on 2 limbs despite evident structural inefficiency. Consume like a baffling range of organic compounds, several of which are objectively hostile to biological tissue. Unclear if adaptive or pathological, and he submitted the report. It was filed in the Velshera's vast catalog under subcategory 7G, promising but fragile. Monitor at 500 cycle intervals. Ambassador HFY didn't request the assignment to Earth. Nobody did. Earth was the kind of posting that happened to you the way weather happened. Not as punishment exactly, but not as reward either. The Interstellar, Compact had protocols for first contact with Tier 2 civilizations, and those protocols were, by design, staffed by whoever had nothing better to do. HFY had nothing better to do. I think he was between catalogs. He had Velmorith so badly his secondary hearts were atrophying from sheer motivational disuse. He arrived in a diplomatic vessel the size of a city block, landed it in the Nevada desert because the humans had a facility there that seemed purpose-built for improbable things, and stepped out into air that hit him like a wall of chaotic chemistry. The smell alone. Particulates. Nitrogen-oxygen in ratios that scraped his filtration membranes. Something burning far to the east. And beneath it all, organic decay, the planet's own fermentation, alive in a way that most worlds simply weren't. The human delegation stood in a line. 12 individuals, which various colorations, various sizes, several of them sweating through their formal coverings despite the fact that it was only 38 degrees Celsius, which HFY noted clinically was well within the species' survivable range. They were nervous. The physiological signs were unmistakable. Step-up heart rates, dilated pupils, the slight forward lean of a prey species that has committed to not running despite every instinct screaming otherwise. Interesting. Plus, they had committed to not running. He filed that away in the place he kept things that didn't fit his existing categories, a mental drawer he hadn't opened in about 300 years. The human who stepped forward, Secretary General Amara Osei, according to the briefing material, did something he hadn't expected. She smiled. Not a submission display, not a dominant signal. Something else entirely. Something that used approximately 43 facial muscles in a configuration that seemed to mean a dozen contradictory things simultaneously. I'm glad you are here. I am terrified. I am trying, I think, to make you comfortable. I am also, underneath all that, a little bit excited. HFY had seen 412 species make first contact. None of them had been excited. Ambassador, she said, and her translator bead rendered it cleanly. Welcome to Earth. We've been waiting a long time for this. You weren't aware of us until 8 years ago, HFY said. Factual correction. Standard protocol. Basically no. The smile didn't waver. We were waiting anyway. He had no response filed for that. He moved on. Plus, the diplomatic proceedings lasted 6 weeks and were, by any galactic standard, unremarkable. Humanity wanted Compact membership, and the Compact had conditions. The conditions were manageable, and humanity agreed to them faster than most species, which HFY noted was either confidence or naivety, and he hadn't yet determined which. They signed the preliminary treaties with a kind of giddy seriousness that reminded him, uncomfortably, of a species he'd cataloged in Cycle 71,000. The Dorkai, who'd been enthusiastic joiners right up until the Gaval had eaten their homeworld's magnetosphere, and the compact had offered a strongly worded statement of concern. The Dorkai didn't exist anymore. He didn't share this comparison with Secretary General Osei. On the last day of the proceedings, she caught him standing at the window of the Nevada facility, looking out at the desert. The sun was setting, which had turned everything the color of old blood. The rocks, the dust, even the air itself, smeared with particulates from a wildfire 3 states over. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" she said. "It pretty much is hostile," he said. "The UV index alone. The TBH, temperature variance between day and night, would be lethal on 12 of the 14 worlds I've visited this cycle." "Sure." She crossed her arms, looked out at it with him. "Still beautiful, though." He looked at her looking at the hostile thing and finding it beautiful, and he opened that mental drawer again, the one for things that didn't fit, and dropped this moment into it. Then he closed it, which he left Earth on a Tuesday. His final report, filed aboard the diplomatic vessel, while Sol 3 shrank to a pale smear in the aft monitors, was 11 lines long. The 2 additional lines read, "Humans exhibit unusual psychological relationship with adverse conditions. Do not avoid hostility, appear to aestheticize it. Recommend continued monitoring. Reclassify from 7G, promising but fragile, to 7F, promising, nature of fragility unclear." He submitted it. He went to sleep. He didn't think about the smile. 41 years later, the Gaval came. Plus, not for Earth. Earth was, by the standards of the Gaval's appetite, a backwater, a mudball with a thin atmosphere and a single moon, and a civilization that had only recently figured out that the rest of the galaxy existed. The Gaval came for Velshera Prime. Plus, they came the way they always came, without announcement, without treaty, without the courtesy of a reason. 1,700 warships folding out of dark transit simultaneously, blooming like something terrible and precise. They had done this before. To the Dorkai, to the Miras, to a species in the Outer Arm whose name the Compact had already begun to forget. The Compact's emergency session lasted 4 hours. The Velshera's defense fleet had 340 ships. The math wasn't complicated. HFY wasn't in the session chamber. He was in his office, looking at the catalog, 11,000 years of it, 413 entries, the whole long patient record of a galaxy full of species who had risen and sometimes fallen and occasionally surprised him, and he was experiencing something he didn't have a word for. Not fear exactly. He had words for fear. Not grief, though it was adjacent to grief. Something more like the feeling of reaching for a thing you have always assumed would be there and finding your hand closing on nothing. His assistant spoke from the doorway. "Plus, young. 3rd cycle, which eyes too large for this particular moment. Ambassador, and the council is asking if there are any allied species who could provide military support within." "No," HFY said. "They haven't pretty much finished the question." The answer is no. He didn't look up from the catalog. The Tharn are 3 weeks in dark transit. The Pelagians don't have a military. The Sorith have 17 ships, and they know better than to spend them. No one within response range has the numbers. He paused. No one except he stopped. He opened the mental drawer. He looked at what was inside. Do not avoid hostility. Appear to aestheticize it. Nature of fragility unclear. A smile, which an ugly sunset. A species that had been waiting for the galaxy before the galaxy had announced itself. "Give me Admiral Torres," he said. His assistant blinked. The human?" "Sir, humanity's fleet is... Give me Admiral Torres." He stood. Something in his secondary hearts was doing something they hadn't done since his first cataloging mission, something that took him a moment to identify. It was beating faster. "Tell her," he said, "that Velshera Prime is dying. Tell her the Gaval have come." He paused at the door. "And tell her we've no right to ask. Tell her that. Say it exactly." His assistant stared. "We have no right to ask," he repeated. "And we're asking anyway." Admiral Yara Torres had 3 rules about incoming transmissions at 0300 hours. 1. Nothing good ever wrote a 0300 signal. 2. If the signal was encrypted at Compact 7 level, it was about to become someone else's problem, and that someone was probably her. 3. If the voice on the other end belonged to a being with 4 arms, and the particular cadence of someone who had spent 11,000 years being unimpressed by everything, you put your coffee down, and you paid attention. She put her coffee down. She paid for what it's worth, attention, which HFY's face filled the comm screen. Angular, silver gray, the bioluminescent nodes along his jaw dim and flickering, which in Velshera physiology she'd learned meant extreme stress. Like a human, I think, going pale. He looked, in the most alien way imaginable, like a man who had never had to ask for anything in his life, and was right now hating every second of this. Admiral Torres, he said, the Gaval have assembled a fleet at the border of Velshera space. 1,700 vessels. Our defense fleet can't, he stopped. Something moved across his face that she didn't have a word for. We can't respond proportionately. Yara said nothing. Let him finish. I am aware, he continued, that humanity's membership in the Compact is 41 years old. I am aware that our mutual defense protocols, under Compact Charter Article 7, do not obligate response until a species has maintained membership for 50 years, she said. Yeah, I know in my opinion, the Charter. Yes. A pause that lasted exactly 1 beat too long. I'm also aware that we vent, historically, extended to humanity the consideration that Compact membership ostensibly promises. Pretty much the resource surveys, plus the trade route allocations, the technology exchange protocols. Many of these have been, he stopped again. This was costing him something. She watched him pay it, managed in ways that haven't served your species as they should have. She picked up her coffee, put it down again. You're, in my opinion, asking us to go to war for you, she said. 9 years before we're technically required to, for a species that's been slow-walking our tech transfers for 4 decades. Against 1,700 ships. She looked at him. That's what you're asking. Yes. And your opening move is to tell me you've been screwing us on the trade routes. I thought honesty was, I've observed that humans respond better to HFY. She leaned forward. How long do you have? Something shifted in those dim, bioluminescent nodes. The Gaval will reach Velshera Prime in 11 days. She stood up. I'll call you back in 2 hours. Admiral, 2 hours, she said, and cut the channel. The call she made next was to General Priya Vasquez at Seoul Defense Command, and she made it before she'd even gotten dressed, standing in her quarters in the dark with her hair loose, and her voice exactly as calm as a person can sound when they're having the worst idea of their life and have already decided to have it anyway. Priya, she said, wake everyone up. A pause on the other end. Define everyone. Earth fleets, which Martian garrison? The Jovian defense wings, the 6 carrier groups weave at Proxima. Yes, those ones, don't argue with me. The Kepler station reserves. A longer pause. She could hear Priya breathing. Yara, that's everything we've. I know. If we pull the Proxima groups, and something happens at the colony, I know. The Gaval have 1,700 ships. We honestly have 312, Yara said. Combat ready. Another 40 if I guess. We pull the training vessels out of mothballs, which I intend to do. Silence. The math doesn't work yet. Yara looked out her porthole at the black. Seoul was a basically pinprick from here, Jupiter Station's orbit putting her 3 astronomical units from home. She thought about the 300 million people on Earth who were asleep right now, not knowing. The 30 million on Mars, and the stations, the colonies, the whole fragile, scattered human project, barely a century into the stars. The math, in my opinion, doesn't work, she said, if we fight the way the Gaval expect us to fight. Another silence. Then, what does that mean? It means give me a line to every ship Captain Weave. I mean, want them on a call in 90 minutes. Yara, what are you planning? She was quiet for a moment. Something stupid, she said, that has a real good chance of working for reasons no one is going to be able to explain afterward. At least that's how I see it. The call had 847 participants. It lasted 4 hours and 17 minutes. At the end of it, Captain Deung Park of the USCS Indomitable, a man who had been in the Compact Defense Forces for 22 years and had opinions about everything, said what most of them were thinking. This is either the bravest thing anyone has ever done or the dumbest. It's both, Yara told him. That's the point. She called HFY back in 1 hour and 58 minutes. How many ships can the Velshera muster? She asked. 3 pretty much, 140, he said. And, as I indicated, 41 of those are going to have human tactical officers aboard by the time we reach Velshera space. Do not argue with me about this. It's non-negotiable. They'll follow your commander's orders, but I need eyes on your fleet's decision architecture in real time. Can you do that? HFY stared at her. You're coming. We're coming. Admiral, which our protocols require that I inform you the survival projections for any fleet facing Gaval numbers of this magnitude are HFY. She cut him off, not unkindly, just cleanly. Plus, we read the projections. We had very long conversations about the projections. She paused. Humans have a word for what you do when the math says don't, and you do it anyway. What word? She smiled. It used 43 muscles. We have several, she said. Get your fleet ready. They crossed into Velshera space on day 7. 352 human ships, moving in a formation that the Velshera Defense Fleet's tactical AI initially flagged as an error. Too loose, too asymmetric, lacking the clean mathematical spacing of standard fleet doctrine. Admiral HFY, watching them come in on the long-range array aboard his flagship Velshera's Patience, felt the particular discomfort of watching something he didn't have a framework for. They're not sort of holding formation, his tactical officer said. No, HFY agreed. Their spacing there's no consistent pattern. The groupings are irregular. The carrier TBH groups are interspersed with I can see that. Is this intentional? He thought about a sunset the color of old blood. A woman finding beauty in hostile things. Yes, he said. I believe it's. The Gaval arrived on schedule. 1,700 ships. They emerged from dark transit in the precise, elegant formation that had announced the deaths of 4 civilizations. A sphere of coordinated firepower designed to envelope and compress any defensive formation to turn the physics of space combat into a slow, inevitable arithmetic. The Gaval weren't cruel, exactly. They were efficient. They had never needed to be anything else. Gaval, fleet master of Resh, studied the combined fleet arrayed against them. 340 Velshera vessels. Plus, she studied her scope again. 352 human ships. She had a file on humans. Compact member for 41 years. Pre-interstellar until recently. Notable for high pain tolerance, broad environmental adaptability, and a psychological anomaly the compact xenopsychologists had logged as adversity orientation, a documented tendency to perform better under conditions that degraded the performance of most species. She TBH had read the file. She had not, until this moment, understood what it meant. Fleet Master, her second said, their formation is irregular. Our targeting matrices are having difficulty. The spacing doesn't conform to any standard doctrine. The algorithmic prediction model is, I see it, Resh said. The human formation wasn't a formation at all, in any sense her tactical architecture could parse. It was a chaos with intention inside it. Ships at distances that forced her targeting systems to treat each one as a unique variable rather than part of a predictable whole. Their carrier groups were inside the line vessels. Their fast attack ships, were behind the capitals, which it was wrong. It was wrong in ways that took longer to compute than Wright would have. Time in space combat was everything. Fleet Master, recommend we proceed with standard envelope approach. And wait, she said. Something was wrong about the math, and she needed another minute to understand what. She didn't get a minute. The first wave hit from behind, and not from a human fleet in front of her, from a direction her sensors had logged as empty, had confirmed as empty twice because there was a thing there when she checked, and nothing there when she checked again, and then 11 seconds before impact, something was there. 40 ships, running within my opinion, their transponders off, and their drive emissions reduced to noise level, tucked into the electromagnetic shadow of Velshera Prime's second moon, waiting like a hell breath. The volley hit her rear flank before she'd finished issuing the order to turn. She turned anyway. Her fleet pivoted. 1,700 ships, even efficient ones, don't pivot instantly. And in the 6 seconds it took to reorient, the main human fleet changed. Changed. That was the only word. The loose, unparsable formation collapsed inward and then burst outward in a shape that her tactical AI processed and flagged as she read the flag, and blinked. Aggressive fragmentation, a pattern designed not to win a firefight, but to maximize the surface area of engagement, to force 1,700 ships to divide their fire among 352 independent targets, all moving on unpredictable individual vectors. They weren't trying to beat her. They were trying to be impossible to focus on. Her second said, voice rising despite protocol. Fleetmaster, I can't. The targeting prediction suppressed the AI, Vresh said. Manual targeting. Manual, for 1,700. Manual, she said. Now, the Gaval were very good at manual targeting. The Gaval had been doing this for a long time. They weren't, it turned out, better at it than humans. Hour 1 of the battle, the Gaval destroyed 47 human ships. Hour 2, they destroyed 19. By hour 3, they had destroyed 22 more. 88 total, a quarter of humanity's entire combat-ready fleet, burning in the dark above Valshera Prime. And Fleetmaster Vresh should have felt the momentum shifting in her favor. The numbers said it was shifting. The numbers had always been sufficient before. She didn't feel it shifting. This was the thing about human ships that no file had prepared her for. TBH, they didn't stop. When a Tharn vessel took critical damage, it withdrew. Protocol, rational, survival. When a Velshera ship lost its primary systems, it went dark and waited for rescue. Even Gaval vessels, under sufficiently catastrophic damage, pulled back to regroup. Every species in the compact had some version of this behavior, because every species in the compact had, underneath its tactical doctrine, the same fundamental biological imperative: survive. The USCS Keller was missing its entire port side when it rammed the Gaval heavy cruiser Absolute Efficiency at a closing speed of 40 kilometers per second. Captain TBH, Park aboard the Indomitable, watched it happen on his tactical display and felt something in his chest that wasn't grief and not pride and was maybe the specific human feeling of watching someone do something you'd have done. Keller's gone, his tactical officer said, voice flat. I know. Park didn't look up from the display. Pretty much, target their command ship, not to destroy it. Give me a firing solution for its communications array. Sir, if they can't coordinate the fleet centrally, every one of those 1,700 ships has to make independent decisions. He looked up. They've been fighting as a unified system for 11,000 years. Let's find out if they remember how to fight as individuals. The problem, and this was the problem that Vresh could feel closing around her like a fist, was that human ships seemed to make better individual decisions the worse things got. She had studied this in the file. Adversity orientation. She had read the words. She had not understood that it meant the following: that a human captain whose ship was venting atmosphere from 3 hull breaches and had lost all long-range communications and was running on backup power would, in that moment, become more creative rather than less. That the degradation of a human's support systems didn't produce degradation of a human's decision-making. It produced something that her xenopsychology file called crisis adaptation, and that the humans themselves apparently call by a number of extremely informal terms she couldn't translate. The USCS Marisol Fuentes lost its navigation AI in the second hour. Its captain, Commander Ife Adeyemi, flew the remaining 4 hours on manual in a ship she couldn't fully control, hitting targets she had to calculate by hand, and she hit 9 of them. The Gaval cruiser precision of purpose took a hit that should have been survivable, was survivable by every damage model, and then took a second hit from a different angle 17 seconds later because the human captain who fired it had anticipated exactly where the first hit would push the cruiser and had prepositioned accordingly. Prepositioned, while simultaneously evading 3 different targeting solutions. While damaged, Vresh pulled up the file again. Consume a baffling range of organic compounds, several of which are objectively hostile to biological tissue. Unclear, honestly, if adaptive or pathological. She sat with this sentence for a moment. Then, she closed the file, which 6 hours and 40 minutes into the battle, the human fleet had lost 112 ships. Nearly a third of everything they had. The Gaval had lost 203, and Vresh looked at this number for a long time. Her second looked at it with her. Neither of them said anything, because the number required a kind of rethinking they hadn't done in several thousand years. Rethinking, when you hadn't done it in several thousand years, was slow. 203 ships against 352, They had lost 203 ships. She had engaged Tier 1 civilizations, the old ones, the ones with fleets twice the size of her own, and not lost 203 ships. They're not trying to win, her second said, and his voice had something in it she couldn't name. No, she said. Then, what are they? They're trying to make it expensive. She understood it now. Finally, felt it click into a shape she could hold. They know they can't beat us. They've known since before they left their system. They're not here to beat us. She paused. They're here to make us not want to do this anymore. Her second was quiet. Fleetmaster, he said finally. The Velshera, basically, fleet has barely engaged. They've been holding the flanks, supporting the human lines, but they haven't, I know. She noticed. The humans, in my opinion, put themselves in front. It sat in the air of the command center like a hell breath. The humans had put themselves in front, between the Gaval and a species that had been. She knew this, the file contained this, slow-walking their technology transfers for 40 years. A species that had never fully honored its compact obligations to humanity. A species that had, 41 years ago, sent a single ambassador to a desert planet and written an 11-line report and reclassified them as promising. Nature of fragility unclear. Humans had put themselves in front of that species and eaten 203 ships worth of Gaval fire. Because someone asked, because someone said we've no right to ask, and asked anyway. In the Velshera flagship, Velshera's Patience, HFY watched the tactical display with his secondary hearts doing the thing they'd been doing since before the battle started. He had 340 ships. He had been holding the flanks, as coordinated, supporting the human lines, protecting the approach vectors to Velshera Prime. He had been watching. He had been watching for 7 hours, and he had been doing the math that the math kept refusing to resolve in a way he could accept. The human officers aboard his ships, the 41 tactical advisors Admiral Torres had insisted on, the ones his commanders had agreed to with the pained politeness of people tolerating a requirement, had stopped being polite about 4 hours ago. They were running now on some fuel he didn't have a name for, something past exhaustion into a territory beyond it, their eyes carrying the expression of people who had stepped off the edge of the sensible world and discovered the falling was fine. Actually, the falling was something they'd trained for without knowing they were training for it. His tactical officer said, very quietly, Ambassador, the Indomitables basically, shields are failing, which if we don't reinforce that sector, move the 4th cohort, HFY said. Ambassador, that leaves the southern approach to the planet. Move the 4th cohort, he said again. Not because the math said to. The math still didn't say to. Because a woman had smiled at him in the Nevada desert and found beauty in a hostile sunset and signed treaties that gave them nothing they needed and sent 352 ships into a fight they couldn't win when he said we've no right to ask. He owed her species a debt that had no unit of measurement in 11,000 years of cataloging. He moved the 4th cohort. Hour 9. The Gaval had lost 341 ships. The human fleet had 194 ships, still functional, in the loosest definition of functional. Ships that could move, that could fire, that had someone alive aboard them, and willing to keep doing both. Admiral Torres, aboard the USCS Santiago, had a broken collarbone from when a near miss had thrown her across the bridge, a ship running on 40% power, and a tactical display that looked like someone had spilled a drink on a star map. She was, by any clinical measure, in serious trouble. She felt, by any honest accounting of her own experience, more awake than she had been in years. Fleetmaster Vresh had made decisions. In 9 hours of battle, she had made approximately 47,000 individual tactical decisions, which wasn't unusual. What was unusual was that approximately 12,000 of them had been wrong. Not catastrophically wrong, not wrong in ways that should have mattered individually, but each one wrong in the small, cumulative way of a chess. Game played against an opponent who was playing a different game and who had decided at some point before the board was set that the only way to win was to make every single move slightly wrong for you. The humans had not tried to beat her. They had tried, to exhaust her. They had thrown every variable they had at her targeting systems, her coordination protocols, her damage assessment algorithms, her tactical prediction matrices, not to destroy them, but to force them to work harder, to process more, to generate 1,000 small errors in the gap between what her systems expected and what the humans actually did. They had brought 352 ships to a 1,700 ship fight. They had made her systems work as hard as they had ever worked in 11,000 years of Gaval military history. She looked at the number, 341 ships, and she looked at the human fleet, 194 ships remaining, damaged, spread across a combat space that had chewed through more of her fleet than any engagement in recorded Gaval memory. And they were still moving, still firing. Still, she pulled up the communications intercepts her AI had flagged, the human chatter between ships, expecting the sounds of a breaking force. She heard laughter, not the laughter of madness, not the laughter of hysteria. The laughter of people who had decided some time ago that if this was how it ended, at least it ended like this in the biggest, loudest, most expensive possible way, the kind of ending that would make the galaxy stop and do the math and find a math insufficient. Actually, she closed her eyes. She thought about Look the Dorkai, who had been enthusiastic and gone quiet. She thought about sort of the Mir-S, who had formed a defensive perimeter and broken. She, thought about 4 civilizations she had helped unmake and had not, until this particular moment, felt anything specific about. She thought about 341 ships and 194 humans who were laughing. She opened a channel. Channel protocols required she address the commanding officer of the opposing force. She found the USCS on Iago. She hailed it. Basically, Admiral Torres answered. Broken collarbone, 40% power, hair escaping whatever she'd put it in approximately 9 hours ago, blood on her collar from somewhere unspecified. She looked like she'd been in a fight for 9 hours. She also looked like she wasn't done. Fleet Master Vresh, Torres said, which you're hailing us. I'm going to take that as good news. I'm hailing, Vresh said carefully, because I want to understand something. Okay, you knew when you left your system that you couldn't win this engagement. Torres said nothing, which I think was Vresh was learning, sometimes the same as yes. You came anyway, Vresh said, for a species actually that hasn't honored its obligations to you, that you have known for 41 years and not particularly like the terms of. You came anyway, and you put your ships between my fleet, and you have been eating fire for 9 hours and losing, and she stopped. Why? Torres was quiet for a moment. You basically ever meet someone, she said finally, who asked for something they had no right to ask for, and said so, and asked anyway? Vresh had not, until approximately 9 days ago, but she didn't say that. We come from a hard place, Torres said. Earth isn't. It's not a gentle planet. We've got things on our home world that would give your xenobiologist nightmares. And most of them are just Tuesday to us. We've survived ice ages and famines and all the things we've done to each other, which were honestly worse than anything the planet threw at us. She paused. You learn something from that. And you learn that when someone who hasn't thing left to stand on still stands up and asks for help, that's the only ask that means anything. Everything else basically is negotiating. Vresh looked at the tactical display. 341 ships. I'm going to withdraw, she said. Torres said nothing, which the Velshira homeworld will not be engaged today, Vresh said. Honestly, this isn't a ceasefire. This isn't a treaty. This honestly is, I need to bring the correct information back to Gaval High Command, and the correct information is that the cost-benefit of this engagement has changed in a way that requires recalculation. Recalculation, Torres said, and there was something in her voice. 341 ships, Vresh said, against 352. I want that number on record. I want it understood that I didn't underestimate you. I want it understood that this number exists. It exists, Torres said. You lost nearly basically half of everything you had. We know. For a species you barely know. Torres looked at her for a long moment. We know that too. Vresh closed the channel. She gave the withdrawal order. 1,700 ships, minus 341, minus the math that wouldn't stop rewriting itself in the back of her mind, turned and moved back into dark transit, carrying with them a number that would be studied in Gaval war colleges for 1,000 years, attached to the notation. Do not engage human forces without recalculating cost projections. Previous models insufficient. Eshtavar boarded the USCS Santiago as it limped into Velshera Prime's orbital station on one engine. Torres met him at the docking collar, arm in a sling, face like someone who had been awake for 30 hours and intended to stay awake for 30 more. Around her, her crew was doing the quiet, methodical work of people who had come through something and had not yet decided what to feel about it. He stood in front of her for a moment. 11,000 years of cataloging, plus 413 entries. 9 lines, 11 lines, the whole long patient record of a galaxy he thought he'd understood. I owe you a debt, he said, that I don't have the currency for. It's fine, she said. It isn't fine, it is. He stopped. He wasn't good at this. And he had spent 11,000 years being Velmorith, and he was very much not that now, and he didn't have the vocabulary for whatever he was instead. 88 ships, he said, 158 crew members per ship, average. You look, Eshtavar. She put her good hand on his arm, very briefly. Plus the way he noticed humans did when they meant something they didn't have room to say. Start working on those tech transfers. Something very close to a sound came out of him. The resource allocations too, she said, and I want a seat at the compact's defense table. Like full seat, not advisory. Yes, he said, and we're going to want the Velshera's help building a few hundred more ships because she looked at the tactical display, still showing the ghost echoes of a battle that had ended an hour ago, because I genuinely do not want to have to do that again. No, he said. Neither do I. She looked at him with that smile again. 43 muscles, a dozen contradictory things. You called us, she said. I want you to know that matters. The way you called us. Saying I think, you had no right to ask. He thought about the mental drawer. The things that hadn't fit his categories for 11,000 years. A sunset the color of old blood. A species that had been waiting before it knew what it was waiting for. He had a new category now. He wasn't sure what to call it yet. He thought maybe the humans had a word for it. They seemed to have a word for everything that mattered. The final entry in Eshtavar's catalog, Species 413, Homo sapiens, filed 14 days after the Battle of Velshera Prime, was 31 lines long. The last 3 lines read, revise all prior projections. Previous classifications based on fragility assumptions that have been showed as structurally incorrect. Humanity doesn't avoid adversity, which humanity has spent its entire evolutionary history being selected for by adversity. What we interpreted as fragility was acclimation, a species that has never known a gentle world and doesn't expect one. The correct question was never whether humanity could survive the galaxy. The correct question is whether the galaxy was ready for humanity. He submitted it. He didn't have Velmorith anymore. He wasn't sure he was going to get it back.